Welcome to NCIX Tech Tips. Today we're going to be doing a cable management guide. So we're going to show you either when you're building a new PC or if you want to improve your old PC that you've built yourself, how to organize all of the cables inside for optimal performance. So cable management can do a few things for you. First of all, it can give you better overall airflow. You can clearly see with this case right here, I've got a bunch of cables all in the way of the front fan that's bringing fresh air over to my graphics cards. That's a real problem. It can also make your build look tidier because instead of having cables running around all over the place, you can shorten them up, hide them places so that the inside looks tidy. Now there's an additional benefit to having all your cables out of the way in that you also have less surface area for dust to settle on things inside your case, which means you've got a cleaner overall operating environment inside your computer, which can make your components last longer. So before we really get started on this cable management guide, I want to talk a little bit about modular power supplies. I've done an episode on this in the past, and everything I said back then was true. Modular is so important. It's awesome. It's awesome. Okay, so here's a few benefits of a modular power supply like the Corsair AX850. And I'm going to totally use my cheat sheet here. You can see me looking down. It eliminates ugly clutter. So you can see all these cables right here. That's every single cable I need to wire up a high-end system like the one you see inside. All right? By using a modular power supply, I've eliminated this much cabling from my system that would otherwise be hardwired to the back of a power supply. Awesome. That's that much that I don't need to hide or route or cable tie away somewhere. So there's that. Also, a modular power supply helps us improve airflow by reducing the overall clutter. Last thing, this is cool too. A lot of people don't think of this. It allows easy removal of the power supply from the case. When you've got your wires all cable tied away and tucked into nice little corners, it allows you to just unplug everything, remove the whole power supply from the case if you ever need to do an RMA. Or let's say you buy an AX750, you want to upgrade your graphics card, you need an 850 watt power supply, well, cool. Go ahead, take out your AX750, buy an AX850, throw it in there, and then sell off your 750 with the cables that came with the 850. Awesome, you win, right? So there is another really cool benefit of a modular power supply. It's also really great for cleaning your power supply. So if you need to take it out, blow some compressed air into the inside of the unit from all angles, clean it out, throw it back in, all of a sudden you're gonna find it runs quieter and you didn't need to disrupt your entire build just to do that small thing. So let's start the episode with the two cables that you're probably going to connect first when you're building a new system. That is your 24-pin power cable as well as your 8-pin CPU power cable. Now the 24-pin is the thickest, ugliest wire in pretty much every computer system. Now Corsair, with their black cables and black sleeving, does a great job of making it less ugly, but it's still difficult to hide. So with the AX850, we're going to use its awesome built-in cable management grommets. We're going to go ahead, and if you want to zoom in on the grommet right there, we're going to tuck it right away out of sight. All right, so there, all you're going to see of the 24-pin connector is those cables just tucked away like that. And then we're going to, you see I can flip the case around this way, and I'm going to bring it out as close as possible to the 24-pin connector on my motherboard. Okay, now one thing to bear in mind whenever you're routing cables around behind the case is you want to keep everything as flat as possible because you do have to put this side panel back on at some point. So I'm going to turn that back around. And then now that we've got that sticking out there, we're going to go ahead and plug this into the motherboard, which would be great if I was able to see from this angle. Sorry guys, I'm going to cheat a little bit here. Plug that in like that. Okay, so we've got that curled over. Now all we can see of that big fat ugly connector is a little bit down here at the bottom and then a little bit up here. And then the 8-pin, I already showed you guys in the introduction that I did. The 8-pin is routed around the back of the motherboard tray to that little opening, and then it actually plugs in right next to my 24-pin right here. Okay, those two cables are installed in their optimal tidiness fashion. Something to bear in mind whenever you are routing cables is you don't want to have them too tight. So if I have this cable and there's not enough space and I'm pulling it so it's so tight that the cable is like bent halfway, what can actually happen is the pins can come out of the connector inside and not make proper contact with the pins on the power supply or on the motherboard itself. So you want to make sure there's a little bit of slack in all of your cables. Here, zoom in so I can show you guys the right amount of slack whenever you install them, so you're not putting undue stress on the cables. So now that we've stripped all of the ugly cables out of this case, I'm going to show you what we're starting with, because I did take a couple shortcuts. I did not want to take the H70 cooler all the way out in order to plug in the 8-pin connector that is way in there behind it. So before I had the 8-pin connector running out to the power supply this way, now I have tucked the 8-pin connector. I mean, this is a really well thought out case, you guys. 600T from Corsair, awesome case. So I've taken the 8-pin connector and I have run it out this little tiny hole in the back here where I can move it back there, and then I can access the power supply that way. That way, that cable is almost completely hidden from sight, and it only pops out right down here, okay? The other thing that I actually left wired was the USB 3.0 front panel connector, and the reason I left that wired is because there's pretty much nothing I can do with it to make it really tidy. So I've run it sort of in between components on the motherboard and then routed it out the back of the case as best I could. That's probably the one part of this build that's going to be a little bit ugly even at the end. Now the next thing we're going to do is drives. The AX850 comes with a couple different kinds of SATA power cables. We've got this one right here, which as you can see is quite long. It includes 4 SATA power connectors and then the modular connector on the other end. It comes with 2 of those. So let's say, for example, we had multiple optical drives up here, or if we had a larger case, a taller case like the 800D, we would potentially need to use this one. But in the 600T, I can get away with using the shorter and fewer connectored 2-connector SATA power. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in 2 of those because I want one of them to reach up to my optical drive in the very top of the case, and the other one to reach to my 2 SSDs down here in the bottom of the case. So whenever you are running cables, you got to remember you're kind of layering it. So whichever ones are going to run the furthest away, you want those ones closer to the back of the case. So I've gone ahead and taken my SATA power cable that I want to run up to the optical drive in the top, put it through the rubber grommet, and then I'm going to go ahead and run that all the way up to the top. So I'm always planning, always thinking when I'm doing the wiring in a case, trying to make it so that there's as little overlap between cables on the back as possible. So I'm going to bring that power cable up here, turn the case around again, and then I'm going to plug it into the back of the optical drive, which I'm going to have to try somehow to give you guys a better angle on, although that's quite challenging. So I'll move around to the other side here and just plug it in like that. Now once you've got it plugged in, you can kind of reposition it within the grommet so that it's hidden most effectively. And then remember too, you can play with little tricks when we're doing the cable ties at the end to make them sit in the right positions quite easily. Now we're going to use a similar method for the hard drives themselves, or the SSD drives I should say, where we're going to run that through the grommets here at the bottom as well. All right, we've got those layered quite nicely. Then we're going to turn around the case. And you can see that Corsair's really planned this case out quite well. I know I keep saying it over and over again, but it's really very true in that there's a lot of space here behind the drives between them and the side panel. So that gives us a lot of room to work. So I'm going to go ahead and position this one for that drive, this one here, making sure not to put any unnecessary twists in the cables. Like if I did this and I had a random twist in it, that makes my life a little bit harder when I'm trying to tuck everything away at the end. And I plug that into my second drive. Then, now you can use little tricks. You don't have to use zip ties for everything. So let's say I take these 2 cables and tuck them down just like that. Now they're flat, they're tidy, I can close my side panel, and they're completely out of the way. Now we're going to do the SATA data, or SATA data, however you prefer to pronounce it. Now ASUS kindly includes a couple of different kinds of cables with their motherboards. They have ones that have a single straight connector on one side and then a right angle connector on the other side. I'm going to go ahead and use that one for the optical drive. And then they've got other cables that are straight on both ends, and I'm going to use those ones for the hard drives. Now, right angle SATA connectors on the motherboard. I love these. They're awesome. Because with a lot of modern cases, like the 600T, you can basically plug in your cables and then run them right out of view. Oh, shoot, I've got these folded wrong. Sorry, guys. Give me just 2 seconds here. So you want to take the cables, lay them together flat for the most easy routing when you're moving 2 cables together, and then we can go ahead and run those to the back. If I could just do this right, that would be great. There we are. Actually, you know what? See, this is where we run into sort of aesthetics versus practicality. Normally, I would recommend using SATA connector 0 and 1 first, but for the sake of aesthetics, it's actually better to use these two because we can route them straight through the grommet, whereas with the other one, I had to bend it funny. Okay, and then finally, I'm going to put in the one for the optical drive and run that through the back as well. So now our SATA cables are almost completely hidden. Look how tidy that looks, you guys. Outstanding. So now let's move around to the back. Now the back, it's important to try and keep it tidy and organized, but remember, no one's ever going to see this, so it doesn't really have to be perfect. So we're going to take our data connector. We're going to once again make sure that we're not getting too much overlap with other things, and we're going to run it through the top. And then we're going to take our hard drive ones, flip that over so we can see what we're doing. And what I would tend to try to do with those ones is keep them as close together as possible, so you're routing them the same way. And then plug them in a way that feels natural to the hard drives so that you can easily take the whole bundle of them and tuck them away somewhere. And then what I would probably do at this point, if I had thought to keep one of them handy, is I would actually zip tie that whole whack of cables together. So actually, let me grab a zip tie. I think I do have one handy. And then I will do that right now. There we go. Sorry, guys. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put one zip tie there. And I can clip these off later, making sure I do have some slack and I'm not bending the cables too hard because that can cause data corruption. And then I'm going to put one zip tie there so that I can make sure that those are going to stay nice and flat against the back of the case and out of the way. The next set of cables we're going to run is our front panel connectors. So that is the front USB, audio, FireWire, whatever else you may have. So we're going to go ahead and, this one's a little bit clumsy. We can take them and we can flatten them out as best we can. The reality of it is, on a case like the 600T, it's not going to make much difference anyway because there's so much room back here. But we're going to route those all through this rubber grommet right here, which is the closest one for pretty much all of them. And then we're going to turn around the case and plug all of those into the appropriate headers on the motherboard. So one thing that you're going to want to be aware of is taking the ones that are closest, or rather furthest away from the grommet, and putting those ones on the leftmost as you bring them through so that you don't have any ugliness from that perspective. So we're going to go ahead and plug in the audio. Remember, I did a separate build guide on this PC, so if you wanted any help on where to plug everything in and you want to see close-ups of all of this stuff, then you can also watch the separate build guide on how to build an AMD Vision Black PC. That is what the episode is called. So do please check that out if you have some time. So we're going to plug all these in, and I'm almost done. I'm stalling for time, can you tell? Sorry, guys. Why am I apologizing to you? You don't have to watch. But I appreciate that you do. Plugging in my power LED, finally plugging in my hard drive LED lights. There we go. All right, so once all of those are hooked up, you can see I've got a lot of extra slack here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and pull them from the back until they are an appropriate tightness. So I'm not trying to heave on these. These are very delicate connectors. And then I'm going to grab a couple more zip ties and I'm going to tidy them up a little bit. So you can see right here, there's an AC97 connector. That's an alternate to the HD audio. If you're building a machine like this, you're probably just going to cut this guy off because the odds of you ever going back to AC97 are quite slim. But if you're concerned about the resale value of your case or anything else, say you're building it for a friend, you don't know what they want, then you can just go ahead and zip tie that. Okay, kind of, oops, I didn't quite plan that well. Okay, there you go. So you can zip tie those cables together so that it hides it a little bit and it's not going to stick out. And one tool that is an essential for any cable modding, cable management project is a pair of side cutters. So go ahead, clip that zip tie off. And then I think that's pretty much all we're going to need to run these tidily out to the back. Now, here's a bit of a tricky one, because when you get around to the back of the case, you're going to see that because we ran all of these cables to different spots, now they're all different lengths. So what I tend to do is I take them and I run them all together until I get to somewhere where there's extra space. Then I coil them together, pin them somewhere, and put in a zip tie to hold them all in place. So I'm going to take that loop. I hope I'm not in the way at all here. I'm going to tie a zip tie around it. Okay, make sure that I'm sort of pulling up all the slack, but not over tightening. And then I'm going to pull the zip tie tight. So you can see that is how I'm able to keep it reasonably flat at the back without spending umpteen billion years making sure that everything is absolutely perfect. Because like I said, nobody is ever going to see the back of the case, so it's all about practicality back here. Next thing we're going to do is wire up the fans. Now, there's a couple different approaches for this. We could take all of the fan connectors, and I'm going to show you an example of how I would cable them if I was going to plug them directly into the motherboard. So one of the tricks that I like to use, especially if I have a nice braided sleeved cable like this that's not too ugly, is I'll just take it, tie it in a simple knot, okay? So just like that. I use that to eat up any of the extra slack in the cable, all right? And then I'll just plug it into the nearest motherboard fan header, which happens to be right there. Once that's plugged in, I'll just kind of give it a little bit of a pull, okay? And then tie a zip tie around it right here. Can you kind of see what effect I'm going for? No, you can't. Okay, so I'll tie a zip tie around it right here so that it's as tidy as possible. Now, because we have better options than that in the 600T with its built-in fan controller, we're just going to take every fan connector possible, which is all of them. We're going to run them all around to the back of the case, and then we're going to plug them all into the integrated fan controller. Now, the third option, of course, is plugging all of your fans directly into the power supply if you want them to all run full speed at all times. Personally, I hate that. I mean, quiet build is what it's all about for me. So we have 4 fan connectors here. You can see these cables are quite long. Corsair has to do that to give you flexibility to plug in whatever fans you need. See, it can reach almost everywhere in the case, but it makes for a bit of a challenge cable management wise. So we're going to plug in each one of these fans individually and then kind of get them out of the way as best we can, crossing things over as little as possible. So we take the next one and we run it over here. We take the next one, which is this guy right here, and then we're going to run it to this one. All right, so I crossed them, but what are you going to do? All right, and then we'll take the last one, and we're just going to pull this around here, run this up the side here, and plug it into there. Now, all you can really do in cases like this is pull them all in as much as you can. Okay, so here we're pulling everything in together. Okay, make sure I have the same ends of all of these cables. Sorry, guys. All right, so we're doing that. And then what I tend to do is I just fold all the cables together. Keep folding them over. Make sure that you don't catch that Molex cable by accident, which I did. So you can see it's a bit of a process, hey? It doesn't take that long to do proper cable management in a case, but you do need to do a little bit of planning. So I fold them all together like that. All right, and then I take a zip tie. I'm totally reaching in front of the camera. I take a not already cut zip tie, a brand new one preferably, and then tie that around that whole bundle. Like I said, this is not I'm not going for the tidiest, most meticulous OCD way of doing things. This is more of a practical guide on how to do a quick, tidy cable management job in your case. And then what I'll probably do later, once I've wired up this Molex connector, is cable tie these two bunches together so they're both going to stay in place quite well. Now, I think I've gone on enough times about how you plug the modular cable into the power supply and bring it out the back of the case, so here we are. We need the Molex connector to plug in the fan speed controller. So I'm going to go ahead and run this sort of along with my front panel connectors. I'm just going to kind of tuck it into this loop where it can kind of sit here. Yeah, it's not perfect, but the reality of it is this is actually the first time I have ever done a build in this case. And considering that, it's actually been pretty darn painless. So I'm going to go ahead, take this Molex connector. I'm going to just sort of zip tie it together with itself so that it doesn't move around a whole lot. All right, actually, if I wanted to be sort of even more clever, I could zip tie it in to one of the connectors that I've already run, just so that everything is even more secure back there. So there you go. That's in place. Clip that off. Then I'll take my Molex connector, run that up here, find one that can comfortably reach the fan speed controller, and then make sure that I'm not overlapping things too much. And then I'll take another zip tie, run that over one of the other cables that I've already routed, and secure it as well. There we go. Now all of those are, like I said, not perfect. This is my very first build in this case, so yeah, it's anything but tidy at the back. But we've got all of the fans hooked up, all the front panel stuff hooked up, and now it is time for the graphics cards. So we plugged in our modular cable for the graphics cards. That means we need 4 PCIe connectors. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to route those through the same grommet that we have the front panel connectors coming through. I'm going to put all 4 of them through the same one. And I'm sorry if you guys can't really see what I'm doing here, but you'll be able to see it once we move around to the back, which will be shortly. So we're routing all 4. And remember, consideration always, always, always towards which one's going to come out where. So that means that the, oh, hold on, I think I missed with one of them. Where'd that go? Yeah, there we go. We're going to figure out the way to make sure that our wires cross as little as possible on the other side. So these two go together. There we are. And then these two go together. Okay. Got those separated. Turn the case around. So we can tell right away that this one is going to come out for our top graphics card because I've already sort of planned this a little bit. I'm going to take the 24-pin connector over here. I'm going to put this here, and then I'm going to bring that out to the top graphics card. So I believe, if I recall correctly, this one's going to come out right here under my SATA cables. So that's yet another reason why I took my SATA cables and I moved them up from those bottom 2 slots, because now I have a little gap to poke my PCIe power cables through where they'll be as close as possible to my graphics card. Now, bearing in mind that these are going to come over here, I'm going to take my second ones and I'm going to push them through right here a little bit lower for my second graphics card. So these ones are going to be tied in like this once we tighten everything up at the back of the case. So let's turn this around and show you guys exactly what we've done here. So these ones are coming out at the front. We're going to, once again, we're going to try not to cross them as much as possible. So we're going to go ahead and plug the 6-pin power in here. All right, then we're going to take our second 6-pin power. We're going to take that 2-pin and tuck it underneath so that you can't really see it. All right. So now when you look down at the system, with that 2-pin tucked under the 6-pin, you can't really see it, so it stays nice and tidy. All right, and then our second ones, which come through down here, we're going to bring those ones up over, once again, not crossing them. Plug them into the graphics card. Make sure you got a little bit of slack on there, guys. You don't want to pull the pins out of the connectors, because that can be a real problem. And then for these ones, we're going to take the 2 pins, and we're going to tuck them back up to the top. So when we tie the whole thing together, which I guess we can actually do right now on camera, it's going to look quite tidy indeed. Can you still see that? Okay, great. So I'm going to take that whole bundle of 4 wires, tie the whole thing together right here so that it's not going to shift around, and I can make sure that they stay aligned and neat. Just like that. Okay, let's tuck them in so they're all kind of the same length. And then what happens back there is all kind of, okay, there we go. So there, now we have taken the most direct route out to the rubber grommets, and the graphics cards have power. Yet another cool feature of this case, and something to beware of when you're reading case reviews, is whether or not they ever actually build a system in the case, because a lot of the time you can find serious design flaws just by building a system in it. So another cool feature is actually the, sorry, I gotta get my side cutters again. These little loops at the back of the motherboard tray where you can run a cable tie, a zip tie through them, just like that. Hopefully you can see what I'm doing here. And then you can position the cable exactly where you want it to go and tie it down at the back. This is going to make it a lot easier to keep everything flat at the back of the case, which is important for actually being able to close your case at the end of all of this. Okay, so we've got that one. One of the tricks that I often use is I route them where I want them to go. I find another cable that's already secured, and then I'll actually zip tie them down together. Now, on a lot of cases, you won't get away with tying your 24 pin down to your 8 pin because it's going to be too bulky to close it, but the 800D rather, the 600T does give us enough space to do that. So now I'm taking my PCI Express cables, which I showed you guys my plan on. I'm laying them out as flat as I can, which isn't always easy. And then I'm going to tie those down to my 24-pin cable, making sure that we don't make things too thick so that we are able to close the case at the end of it. And this cable tie is just a smidgen too short, actually, which may be okay still. I might still get it. Almost. Okay, makes me wish I had my pliers, not only my cable, or my side cutters. I do have pliers, but they're in my backpack, which is kind of too far away right now. There we go, whew, got it. Very nice. So now I can cut that off. All right, so you can see that those are now laid down flat enough. I'm gonna take this SATA cable, I'm just gonna kind of find another loop up here. So I'm going to tie down that SATA cable. I'm also going to tie down that fan connector. So I'm just going to kind of liberally apply zip ties to the back. Bring everything down. You know, you don't need to crank everything tight. Just make sure it's tight enough to hold it in place. That's all you're really going for here. I can find anything that's sort of going to move around. I can take it, tie it together. Cut it off. All right, so this is all just kind of part of the process here, guys. Take all these, bring those together as well, making sure you're not pulling anything so that you don't have at least a little bit of slack on it. All right. And there you go. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do this on camera. So we're going to find out real time whether I'm actually able to close the side panel of this case or not. I'm going to go ahead and put that on there. Just like that, we have closed up the case, and let's go ahead and turn it back around. I'm going to show you guys what it looks like now that we have employed some basic rules for cable management to the inside of our PC. So thank you for checking out our episode on cable management, and I hope you have enjoyed this very time-consuming episode of NCIX Tech Tips. All right, so now that our build is finally finished, we've got our AMD Vision Black Machine all done. I just want to go over a couple quick QC principles before you turn your computer on for the first time. So, 1, you want to go around and make sure all of the connectors are securely inserted, okay? That is, there's no gaps between the connector and the receptacle for it. So you want to check all your fans are plugged in, you know, do quick due diligence to make sure that everything is plugged in correctly. Then, the next thing you want to do is turn on the power switch for the first time. Now, whenever I turn on a system for the first time, I have one hand on the power switch, and then I have the other hand around the back on the power cord. Because if anything goes wrong, if a fan's not spinning, or if something starts smoking, you want to get power cut off to that system fast. All right, so that is another thing that's a good due diligence principle. The last due diligence principle before you press that button is never put on the side panel before you power a system on for the first time, because it jinxes it. If you put on the side panel and go, all right, I'm done, before you actually test it, I guarantee you something won't work. So never do that. All right, so we're gonna power this baby on. And now that we've got it powered on, we're gonna go around. We're gonna check that all of the indicator lights work. So I've got my hard drive LED light, my power light works. I'm gonna move around. I'm gonna make sure all of my fans are spinning. Do a visual inspection of every single fan in the system. That even means tilting it up. Make sure your power supply fan is spinning. All right, I got that. Make sure the H70 fan is spinning. All right, all of the lights on my fans are working. There's no obvious problems. Next thing I'm going to do is connect all of my essentials, which means keyboard, mouse, monitor, network, and power. Well, I've obviously got power installed already. And then finally, if we've got the system posted, all of the devices are detected in the BIOS, so you can check that by seeing which hard drives are detected, which optical drives are detected. Finally, you're ready to close up the panel. And congratulations on building your system. Thank you for checking out our build guide for our AMD Vision Black system. I hope you've enjoyed it. And I want you guys to leave a comment under the video and tell me what would be the specs of your AMD Vision Black system if you built one today. Thank you for watching NCIX Tech Tips. Yeah, one more thing at the end of the episode. I know I always do this. The fan controller, it works awesome. So here, I've got my mic here. I'm gonna put this next to the H70 at the back of the case, and then I'm gonna turn the dial on the fan controller all the way to max and all the way back to minimum. More airflow, more silence. Very cool.